I think this generational wealth transfer is fake. But at least in America, most people's wealth is in their primary home, right? And real estate is just the most scarce liquid asset the average Joe can get their hands on. Over a generation, more homes are going up for sale and there's, less buyers. The price of that home will be driven down. And so if that's the case, then, it's like, well, that wealth transfer, doesn't exist. And, if you walk through any major American city, and it's pretty easy to see. I think people are feeling this sensation. They just can't really put their finger on why, and that's why I always try to lead it back to the money printing.
All right, Wyatt O'Rourke, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm stoked that you're here. We met in Vegas. We did a panel together, and I think. You have some really interesting thoughts about Bitcoin that I think I also learned from. So I think it's really interesting to explore them together now. And I just wanted to kind of start with part of your journey. I think when I talk, of course, to so many people, and they all share that embracing Bitcoin really changed their relationship with money and managing their finances right, taking risk, thinking about risk, thinking about their long-term outlook and decision-making. And I thought it would be an interesting place to start there. Like, how has embracing Bitcoin changed those things for you? And maybe, if you can add to that, kind of like, where did you come from? What was your understanding before about money or risk? Or did you even think about all those things before you adopted Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bram, thanks so much for having me on, man. I'm stoked to do this, and I'll just start by being a narc right away. I'm a wealth manager, state registered, RIA, fiduciary in the States. So, not financial advice. Thoughts and opinions are my own. But that kind of segues nicely. So, I went to college for finance. I regret it, honestly. I'm pretty jaded about my higher ed, experience, just because I got a Keynesian finance degree and went into debt, for it. And if I was a Bitcoiner then, I certainly wouldn't have made, that decision. And, it just really is kind of a shame, I would say. It's not a surprise, but just how closed-minded, I would say, your standard university professor is to Bitcoin. I think, there may be two schools in the US. I know only one for sure. University of Wyoming is actually opening up a Bitcoin department or a Bitcoin school, which is very, very neat. But, I was just Bitcoin at that time for me fit every classic FUD angle that we've heard. It's it doesn't cash flow, there's no intrinsic value, this is drug money. And that was actually my first exposure to it in 2017. I knew a guy in college was actually using it to sell drugs, and I was just oh, see, I knew it, but it wasn't really until 2020 in the pandemic. I graduated, I was living with my roommate, I was working in traditional finance, and it was only because we got locked in our apartments together. He was a Bitcoiner. I gave him credit, no marge, for orange pilling me. He was just berating me about it. I was like, okay, man, I'll listen to your podcast just so you shut up. And he showed me Preston's podcast, and he kind of comes from a similar value investing, TradFi background. And so it just kind of clicked with me. Obviously, I kind of come from the finance, economics lens, and he really talks about, it's what is money, and our, existing, financial and monetary system. So that just really clicked with me. I'm, feel very fortunate. Preston's one of the first folks, I listened to, just because we have that shared experience. And from there, it was just down the rabbit hole. I think, Bitcoin's one of those things you can't unsee, once you see it. And it really does just kind of reset your decision making, matrix. It is very interesting. Really kind of enjoy the philosophical aspect of Bitcoin. I'm not professionally trained in, philosophy or anything. I'm just I want to be, think boy. But, there's very few sources, sole sources of truth out there. And there's very few, decentralized systems out there. And the technology side of things wasn't as native to me, so it's taken me a lot more work and effort to kind of grok those things. But when you combine them, you're just like, wow, we're really working with something very unique here. And I just think like there's obviously a lot of unique aspects of Bitcoin, but just being able to opt out and opt into something that can't be controlled by central authority, single entity or individual. And you try to apply that to like different parts of your life, like said, it's very uncommon. And then, if you're kind of using or viewing that as the base layer and then rebuilding like your worldview on top of that, it really kind of, I think, makes you reconsider, all your previous priors.
Yeah, I would argue that if you actually come at it from a philosophical angle, I think that's probably also to some degree a great way to help people understand Bitcoin for the long term, right? The number go up is great. Just understanding why it exists, what it brings you, how it changes your outlook on life eventually, basically, I think is probably something that is a more long-term thing for people to embed, right? You mentioned your Keynesian education, then being interested in that philosophical side of Bitcoin. How did you experience those clashing that clashing content, basically, right? Because when you go in debt, you do a study, you think, okay, this is the thing that I should follow because I actually paid for it. Then you come across something that you're curious about, and that knowledge clashes. How did you experience that?
Yeah, man. Well, it's tough because obviously you're almost kind of like born into like the existing system. So somebody who like you spent a lot of time studying it and when in debt, it's like I was bought into it, right? And so it's like coming out of it, it's like you really have to kind of like swallow a hard pill. It kind of sucks. Or it's like I was saying, I wouldn't do it again. And it's like regret's probably too strong a word, but it's like, wow, that sucks. And it's like, well, I have to live with that. And I really, my Bitcoin journey has like coincided like pretty or has a lot of overlap with my faith reconversion journey. I was just raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, but really fell away from the faith. And like high school and college, unfortunately, is a lot of young people do. And so it's like when you remove yourself from a grounding force like Christianity or religion, and you just kind of become another secular member of the world. Like what really kind of stood out to me is like the Keynesian fiat denominated system is like very degenerate, and I didn't like know that at the time. There's a lot of things that play into this. It's like very high time preference. From the finance angle specifically, I kind of think of money simply as like the base market, and every market on top of that is every other market is built on top of that. And so if the base market is distorted, well, you're not really making informed economic decisions. Like you're just gambling. And it's like, well, that's really like, it's not a good way to live. I think people kind of like, more or less feel like this, pit in their stomach, or it's like, oh, this doesn't feel right. I just like kind of feel forced to do it. This is what everybody else is doing or saying I should do. So I'm just going to kind of like follow the mold. And I think, a lot of people are actually like hurt by that. I think for, our generation specifically, it's just like buy a house, they go up in value. It's like, what could go wrong? It's like, well, a lot of things could go wrong. It's like they're extremely, inflated. I don't think they're, a lot of times like, good investment. They're really viewed more as an investment now as opposed to like a utility and someplace to live. So we've even kind of really distorted, the true intention of it. But, when I kind of, now kind of break it down, simply, it's like, I like macro, economics. I think we have to be, careful with how we evaluate it. And so I try to just be like a big picture, thinker when it comes to this stuff, just because we're dealing with very complex systems and there's a lot of different variables, and it's easy to connect your own dots and draw your own conclusions based on, your biases. And so I just try to focus more on pattern recognition. And I'm a big believer in the fourth turning thesis. I think Ray Dalio's 250-year sovereign debt crisis is pretty accurate. And if you lay those two on top of each other, we're almost exactly coinciding with like the fourth turning and then the 250-year, debt cycle. And so, big picture, I think, we can like point out or, extract some certain variables that point to that. But I think big picture, those two are kind of overlapping. I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all times. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. My American friends, I've got something for you. If you're into Bitcoin, you want to grow your stack in any way possible. What if you could do it effortlessly just by spending your fiat? The Gemini Bitcoin credit card is designed to help you do just that by giving you instant Bitcoin rewards on every purchase. Just use it like any other credit card and earn back up to 4% on transportation, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. There are no annual fees for this card and no exchange fees to receive your Bitcoin rewards. Sign up to get your limited edition Bitcoin Orange credit card and earn a $200 Bitcoin bonus when you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days. You can find more information and terms in the description below, or go to gemini.com/Bram to sign up today and start stacking effortlessly. That's gemini.com/Bram.
It's very exciting that we have Bitcoin in this time. I almost feel like it's divine providence, just that we have this sound neutral monetary asset while the fourth turning and 250-year debt cycle are playing out, because it really does give specifically younger people an opportunity to, I think, get ahead. And Bitcoin's obviously very exciting technology, and so we have like all this uncertainty in the future. So it's like, how do we really make sense of this? And I found a lot of comfort actually like looking to the past and pulling on lessons from the generations that have come before us. And so specifically in Catholicism, like we have a rich history in like old Europe, where it's like these wealthy aristocratic families shared a common and strong Catholic moral worldview. And while they may have been wealthy, they felt a very strong connection to their local community. They felt obligated to take care of their local community, and we really, I think, this is called the noblesse oblige, which means like nobility obligates. So it's like they felt obligated to do good with the resources they had. I think because of their moral worldview, and so just drawing on their prior examples, I think gives me a lot of confidence moving forward. And it's funny how I just think that is like the most perfect Bitcoin analogy, because I'm of the belief that Bitcoiners will be the 1% of political and economic power moving into the future. And so that's not a responsibility like you can just step into. You really have to like prepare yourself, mentally, physically, and spiritually to shoulder that. And I think particularly for our generation is extremely important, because whether we like it or not, we are the first generation of Bitcoiners, right? And so, we both have young children, which is super exciting. I can't wait to have more. But my descendants will be then the second generation of Bitcoiners, and they're going to look to us, and it's like, how are we stewards of this assets? How did we make sure this asset was used for good? How were we diligent in making sure our Bitcoin actually got to the next generation? And so just kind of sum that up, I think just like while there is some uncertainty, and in uncertainty gets exciting about the opportunities that can come from that, I don't think we need to necessarily recreate the wheel. And there's a lot of lessons we can draw from our ancestors and use that wisdom moving forward.
If we talk about Bitcoin's moral worldview, basically, right? Like the principles that we think emanate from the adoption of Bitcoin. How do you think about sound money influencing our values and the choices that we make in life? Let's start there.
Yeah, totally. No, it's a great point, and I've done some work to try to help Catholics and the church adopt Bitcoin, and thank God or God bless Bitcoin. Great documentary. They interview Christians, Jews, Muslims, and there's surprisingly a lot of, I would say, like intrinsic features of Bitcoin that align with the teachings of the three predominant or largest religions in the world, which makes me just kind of reflect on all Satoshi's creation, because I just think like it's so beautifully designed, just from like its incentive structures and intrinsic features. I'm just like, wow, this is really amazing. But to answer your point, when I was living a more secular life, I just thought I had to like logic my way through everything, and I had to like think of everything on my own. And it's like there's a lot of truth to that. It's like we should take responsibility for our actions and be independent thinkers. But I actually was a lot more relieved, where it's like I said earlier, it's like I don't actually need to recreate the wheel here. I actually have my personal case, 2,000 years of tradition to like learn on and extract their wisdom. It's like I'm actually not the first person to be encountering some of these questions or dilemmas. And so just I think drawing from the past has given me a lot more confidence to move into the future. And there's a quote from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verse 48, that is, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. And to me, it's like that just resonates extremely deep, I think, with any Bitcoiner, because if you have a finitely scarce asset, there will never be more than 21 million coins, and you have some, it's like, okay, well, that verse then applies to you, because you've already been given much. I think obviously be a lot more in dollar terms in the future, and so you then have a responsibility to use that wisely. And obviously people waste it. There's a lot of bad financial practices out there, but it's like if you have that responsibility, and for men like us who are trying to lead our family, I think it really kind of takes on different shape, where it's like Bitcoin, I do think, is generational wealth, and specifically for young people that really kind of bore the brunt of a fiat monetary system for a long time. This is kind of I think, I don't want to say wealth transfer, but it's kind of like an opportunity for us to I would say get ahead. I don't think like capitalism itself creates wealth inequality. I think essentially planned money printing creates wealth inequality. And so I think the best analogy I can kind of think of it is like the old saying, it's like the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Well, it's like I'm trying to imperfectly apply that to complex systems, where it's like the more complex they are, like the longer they can keep the music going. Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of like in that transitionary period right now. And so if you take it upon yourself to learn about Bitcoin and acquire Bitcoin, I think you're going to be well set up in the future. But because of its unique qualities, like its ability to take custody, that comes with a lot of responsibility. And that's I was alluding to earlier, where it's like, are you ready to step into that role and that responsibility? And do you understand like the responsibility that comes with being a Bitcoiner?
Yeah. I think this is an amazing point. This morning I I invited someone on the podcast. We recorded an episode. It's a previous episode that's live with Deontay. He's like very early in his journey, right? So a Bitcoin beginner, and I invited him to ask like all his beginner questions and see if I could be of value to him and to other people that are early in the journey. And we talked about the fact that people need to realize that with everything actually that they own monetarily, any monetary assets or any assets that they try to store their value in, they are either outsourcing the verification of that asset or the ownership of that asset to other people, basically, right? To another institution or a company or whatever. And I think being able to take ownership of something like Bitcoin yourself actually brings that out, that reflection or that internal discussion. Does that make sense? Like I just think that's really interesting to think about, because it's something very new. You haven't really been able to do that before the existence of Bitcoin. So you are instantly confronted with this ask for courage or bravery to actually take that ownership over your life.
No, I think you're 100% right, and it's a great point. And another way to kind of phrase like the fourth turning is it's like the strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men, kind of like trope. And I think strong men are the backbone of any prosperous civilization and in society. And we have a lot of data to prove that. And when I look in today's day and age and like what it means to be a strong man, it's like, well, 100 years ago or 200 years ago or whatever, it's like you probably like planted a farm, and it's a lot of hard work, pick the crops, and you're doing all this by hand. And it's like that took a lot of physical and mental strength. It's like, well, just because I can go to the grocery store and buy my vegetables doesn't mean I shouldn't be a strong man today. It just means my responsibilities have changed. And I really kind of view that as like, am I in full control of my data? I try to, experiment with open source technologies and, hosting, my own node, like our, photo album and, stuff like that. It's like, am I, in control of as many, things as I can be? That's obviously most, at the forefront with my wealth and Bitcoin. It's like, am I taking, full control of my wealth? Am I willing to, learn and take on the responsibility to do so? And so I think like the responsibilities of a strong man, obviously change in the 21st century, but that doesn't mean, responsibilities, don't exist. And I can't believe I have to credit, Spider-Man for this quote. I have a hard time thinking like, Spider-Man, came up with this, but it's like, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's like, that to me is, innate within, Bitcoin. And, founded Basilic, Financial. We're a Bitcoin focused, wealth management firm. And I refuse more or less to, buy the ETF, for my clients, because we're not in Bitcoin for just price exposure. Like all of our, Bitcoin investments are centered around, self-custody. And it's, we spent a lot of time, working with clients, and help them understand, or it's like, well, when it comes to this, like there is no silver bullet to self-custody, right? It's a series of trade-offs. And we try to frame it in terms of, risk surface area. And so, we partner with Unchained, and we're able to, offer tiers of, self-custody solutions. You can hold 2 keys. Unchained has 1. I'm a key agent, so I hold a key in the quorum. We can list, multi-institutional, multi-sig, and there's no like perfect answer. It's just really identifying or helping our clients identify. It's like, what risks are you willing to take? And, on a, risk matrix, it was like, what series of trade-offs are you willing to take? And so it does take, a lot of, gumption to, fully understand, what you're getting into. And, we really try to phrase this in like the importance and, prosperity it can bring to you and your family. So these things are worth considering. And this isn't something we should just, blindly outsource or buy the ETF because, number goes up. It's like, you're really kind of missing the point, in my opinion. If that's, ultimately what you're after, is just to make, a quick buck. And I don't care if, Fidelity or whatever, owns, my Bitcoin IOU on the back end. And so I think it's just kind of, rephrasing or reframing, I should say, the context of the opportunity and, the trade-offs associated with it.
Yeah. You mentioned wealth transfer or Bitcoin as generational wealth. I think there's two ideas there, right? One is the millennials are going to inherit the most that's ever been inherited. Well, if the socialist governments don't take away too much, but conceptually, right? And so, what do you do with that, right? So, I think on one side, you either understand that the financial system is not working for you, or you don't. If you realize it's not working for you, what are your alternatives, right? How are you going to steward that money that you inherit from your parents or grandparents? So I think that is one. So there is the greatest wealth transfer of all time that is happening, right? And then on the other side, basically the opportunity that people have is the fact that if you understand that financial system is not designed for you, and you start digging into, okay, how can I protect this wealth that I've inherited? Obviously, Bitcoin is becoming, or perhaps is already, something that is not going away, has superior characteristics compared to other assets that you can use to store and protect your wealth. And so we have this wealth transfer. We also have this generational opportunity, because the wealth transfer is happening in a time frame where you can actually still take advantage of the asymmetric opportunity that is Bitcoin. And because it has superior characteristics as opposed to other assets, it will eat away at those allocations, right? I think that's talked about a lot. But when we then think about, okay, if you understand these two things and you act upon it and you start adopting Bitcoin as a millennial in whatever way, what does that generational wealth look like, in the sense that maybe also connected to what you mentioned, we could become the 1% of political and economic power because we actually took action on the opportunity that we have. That was a long intro to the question, but I wonder if you can kind of talk about that, like, because it's so rare that it's very hard to visualize or even accept that we are living in this time frame where we could actually do that.
It's beautifully said, Bram. And I'm happy we got to this point, because this is probably my biggest zinger I brought for you and your audience. Is I think this generational wealth transfer is fake. It's talked about a lot, but I'm looking at market dynamics, and this will be kind of predominantly U.S. focused. So I apologize for our European listeners. I'm just not as in tune with the nuances of those market dynamics. But I have to mention, they're fairly similar. But at least in America, most people's wealth is in their primary home, right? And I think this is just a symptom of unfettered money printing. And Jeff Booth says it beautifully. It's like, when the money's not scarce, it'll flow to scarce assets, and real estate is just the most scarce liquid asset the average Joe can get their hands on. And that's why we have all this monetary premium on top of the utility value of specifically real estate, at least in the US. And so let's pretend, and I'll fall on the sword here in this example, Bram. I'm the boomer and you're the millennial. And so if I have, this house I bought for $85,000, that's now, $500,000. So like, that's insane, price appreciation. Odds are, like, the bones of the home are not in better shape. It's just that the, monetary value of the home has, drastically increased, because people are trying to store their wealth in the most scarce asset they can get their hands on. It's like, well, you as the millennial in this example, when it comes time for that wealth to be transferred, it has to trade. Otherwise, those are just paper gains, right? It's like, if those gains aren't realized in a open market, we're just sitting on paper gains, which is essentially nothing, right? There's some nuances there. You could borrow against it, if you just like inherit a house from your parents or whatever, grandparents. But I think this generational wealth transfer is really going to fizzle out, predominantly because of real estate dynamics. But me also as a millennial, it's like, well, I rent because I also live in Denver. It's a high priced city, specifically when it comes to real estate. It's desirable place to live. So a lot of people, move here. It's actually like, it's in the middle of the country, but it's kind of on, little island population wise. So, logistically supply, chains are strained. So, that increases, building costs and all these things. But I'm not going to buy a home strictly for investment purposes. I'm going to buy a home because I intend to live in it. I want to, live where I want to live. So I will, continue to rent and I won't buy. But if I don't buy and, over a generation, more homes are going up for sale and there's, less buyers, like the price of that home will be, driven down. And so if that's the case, then, it's like, well, that wealth transfer, doesn't exist. And that's ultimately how I kind of, back into that conclusion. So I would really not, rely on people to, or I would, suggest people don't rely on, like this generational, wealth transfer. I think it's a bunch of hubbub, but, specifically when it relates to Bitcoin and, young people or risk takers have an opportunity. And I do believe this is a generational opportunity, is that, just kind of like standard, S curve dynamics, or it's like, risk takers, so you're buying, Bitcoin in 2013, you are a risk taker, I would say it was much more unproven, and you've been, rewarded for, taking that risk.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want: Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read, and it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with StampSeed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, StampSeed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from StampSeed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with StampSeed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order.
I'll relate this back to the 1%. One of the things I'm most optimistic about, in Bitcoin is its grassroots nature. I don't think this gets talked about enough. I think this is extremely unique. I don't think there's probably, I was going to say any other, but there's probably like very few, for being realistic, like grassroots movements, specifically
GameStop. But I don't want to make a joke of it, but I agree. There's not the human network connected to Bitcoin as the asset is something that is a moat for Bitcoin, right?
Well, totally. And just the fact that this was released to the world at the same time, and anybody who was paying attention had the opportunity to participate, I think, is extremely unique. And so, in kind of a fiat, Keynesian, monetary system that we've been, the West has been, living in for, simplicity's sake, 200 years, it's a lot of top down power and decision making. And, there's a lot of like boys club, type, behaviors and attitudes that kind of take direction from top down. It's like Bitcoin is bottom up. It's the individuals that are willing to participate in it from literally the bottom, and it's open to anybody across the world. It really, I think, changes the decision making class like on its head. Completely flips it. I think your classic JP Morgan banker and your average Bitcoiner don't have necessarily like a lot in common. So, if you're really transitioning the type of person that has wealth, that has influence, and this kind of reminds me. Have you seen that like Myers-Briggs graph floating around Twitter of the Bitcoiner personality types?
Can you see it? Do you see my background or not? I don't know what.
Oh no, I don't.
I have a cap that says INTJ.
Oh, okay, right on.
It's my undercover Bitcoin hat. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like we're getting a whole different, class of decision makers that I think are rising to the top because of the, wealth preservation and appreciation aspects of Bitcoin. I'm extremely excited about that. I think it's going to fundamentally rework how our societies work and make decisions.
Okay, so your hot take is there is no generational or there is no wealth transfer. I would actually agree with that. I also have never thought about it like how you shared. It's a lot of paper wealth, and the majority is in homes. And you are basically arguing that those will lose value during or shortly after this supposed transfer, right? Well, the transfer happens when our parents die or grandparents die, obviously. Is that a good summary? So it is not real value in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly don't think it's everything it's cracked up to be. These are paper gains, and I don't think these assets will actually trade at their paper value. And when they don't trade at their paper value, this wealth transfer is much less than advertised.
Okay, fair point. So if we I think that connects to something else I wanted to ask you. I mean that is because the fiat money is obviously being debased into perpetuity, right? Like this is what people need to understand. This is designed. The system is designed like that. So you learned during your study that that's a good thing because that incentivizes people to spend the units of money, right? But no one ever really talks about how creating more units of money actually devalues all the existing units of money. Even that, by the way, I think that's funny. You need to think about that philosophically or even kind of visualize it to actually understand what that means. Does that make sense? Like some people
totally
find that really hard. I think the example of Lynn Alden, she has a video where it shows like a scale. And on the one side, it is amount of money units. And the other one is prices of goods and services. And so the more heavy this side, more money units, the price on the other side goes up. And I think that's a perfect illustration of how the creation, the inflation of the money supply actually is the source of inflation of prices, right? But yeah, if you I wonder what you think, because that for me now is very logical and simple. But I do remember when I realized that I was like, oh, yeah, this is the way that I could look at that, because it is a given that more units of the money are being created. It's literally what the Keynesians propose or think is actually necessary, right?
100%. And that's actually where I tend to start at, some of my own biases, but I try to simplify money printing and how you're getting debased as simply as I can when I try to orange pill newbies. And I did create this menu a while back, so it's just like when trying to talk to new people about Bitcoin, identifying like what they're into, what they identify with. It's like, are you into like the finance economics angle? Are you into the technology angle? Are you into like the sovereignty angle? And try to meet them where they're at. But this to me, I think again, maybe my biases, but I think it's like the most simple way to understand why Bitcoin is important. And I always show people debtclock.org, which is the US debt, and it's so out of control. We're at 37 trillion. It's like Lynn beautifully says, like nothing stops this train. I think we're in the full-fledged debt spiral. But yeah, and what I think is particularly nefarious about the fiat Keynesian system is that you're getting robbed in silence via inflation. And if you're lucky, I think, U.S. average, wages increase, about 3% a year. My financial plans, I model, 6% inflation just because I use M2 money supply. And over the last 10 years, it averages about, 6% increase. CPI is a fake manipulated statistic. And somebody told me, they call it CP lie. He was like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. I'll start saying that. And so, we're just trying to understand, how many units, enter the market each year. So it's like, well, you own, the numerator, but the denominator, keeps increasing. That means like the numerator is, consistently smaller each year. And it's like you are getting debased and you're getting, robbed. And how I think this is, nefarious and just straight up evil. I've gotten a lot of clarity just trying to, call a spade a spade. And it's like, I don't think it's red or blue or, right or left. It's good and evil. And it always has been. And, anything else is kind of more or less a distraction. But, this fiat money dynamic, I think, has, creates a lot of societal, issues. And it really creates this sense of despair. And I think, it strips us of our individual agency, which is, our gift from God, because we aren't able to receive accurate signals. And when market feedback is distorted or manipulated, you lose your ability to make informed decision. And I think that erodes your sovereign agency, and this really kind of plunges you into a state of despair where rational thought and sound decision making are become like very hard to make. And the thing about despair is it's not just like a momentary lapse in judgment. It's like a corrosive force that like snowballs, and it leads to increasingly poor decisions that exaggerate the suffering. And I really just don't think humans are meant to operate in a state with such uncertainty. I think we thrive on clarity and truth, and anything else distorts our values and our time preferences, and it really makes us vulnerable to poor decision making, which compounds over time, which I think that's detrimental. And you walk through any major American city, and it's pretty easy to see. I think people are feeling this sensation. They just can't like really put their finger on why. And that's why I always try to lead it back to the money printing.
It's so sometimes so hard to confrontational to realize it's so big, right? It's so big. The things that you at least need to partially understand to understand why something like Bitcoin even exists, or what kind of purpose it can have for your life, is so big. And so I'm also thinking, there is this. I heard you talk somewhere about that we're like on the Titanic, right? And there's this iceberg, and everyone's seeing the iceberg, and the ship is trying to steer like like when you look at the TV, you see people doing things, and but the iceberg is still there. And I just wonder, like, how can we wake? How do we wake the people around us up? Like, how can we either simplify or make it more confrontational, or I don't know what a good strategy is, but it's just a lot to process, and the time is ticking. In two ways, I would say: the debasement of fiat money, but also the absolute scarcity of Bitcoin, and the window you have right now to get on this lifeboat, to stay within the analogy of the Titanic. Yeah, how do we do that? And do you think it actually matters if we reach more and more people? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think it matters. I think TikTok, next block, like Bitcoin doesn't care. I think Bitcoin's fine. Bitcoiners will be fine. But specifically as Christians, we're called out to go out in the world and use our talents and resources for good. I certainly try to do that. To grow Bitcoin adoption. I think we should be sounding the alarm. I think the biggest challenge we're up against is these specifically the Federal Reserve and central planners that are extremely creative at creating artificial demand for dollars. And obviously the US has a very vested interest in maintaining oh my goodness, dollar a world reserve currency. Whoa. And so, this happened, in the 70s with, the petrodollar. And it's like, okay, Saudi Arabia will protect you with our military as long as you price your oil, in dollars. I think the next iteration of that is actually the Genius Act and stable coins. And so, even, 20 years ago, where it's like, okay, it may have been hard to, think of a scenario where it's like, okay, petrodollars, like we can see the end. There's no getting out of this. And then lo and behold, 20 years later, it's like they solve another, creative way to create, artificial demand for dollars. And so I think this is kind of what I was getting at earlier with that, kind of broken analogy about complex systems, taking a long time to, unravel. It's like they have a vested interest in making, sure they can stay empowered. So I think it's just, and our challenge is like, it's just going to be such a slow burn. And it's like, just each year you're constantly just getting chipped away, like 3%, if you're making 3% more, but you're getting debased, 6%, you're just net minus 3% like each year. And it's like, that's very hard to, see a year by year basis. Obviously, if you zoom out and, look at the sum total of that, it adds up. But, unfortunately, not a lot of people do that. And we do live in such a high time preference society. Like they're not even, willing to. Unfortunately, it's like the Zoomers, they're the most, indebted, generation ever. There's a much higher sense of, YOLO. We don't even care about savings because, we're not going to have it anyway. Everything's so expensive. Like we'll never afford a house or assets or, whatever. So we're just going to spend money now. So there's a lot of like large forces we're fighting against, unfortunately. But that being said, I think we're doing a disservice to, everybody by, not talking about Bitcoin and making sure they, understand these systematic, problems. And I give, you and, kind of the decentralized media a ton of credit. I think this is like a phenomenal way to reach people and bring them into the fold. I do think it's our responsibility to do that.
So how could we help our generational peers and also Gen Z in kind of taking that first step, maybe not only studying, but also maybe to go back to the bravery and the courage, really getting to the confrontation that is needed before you can actually do the practical things of adopting Bitcoin. What are your angles or approaches, or what would be your advice for people to start on that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think we need to, be brave. We need to be bold. We need to speak the truth. I think that really does start with, meeting people where they're at and having, open and, honest, dialogue. But, the debasement is like a very serious problem that's a little harder to fight, just given that, it happens at a much, slower rate, kind of, behind the scenes in the background. Like it's very hard to, notice. I do think, it is getting much more noticeable. I've seen some viral videos of, people reordering their groceries, 5 years later. And it's like, it was, $80 5 years ago, and now it's like 130. So I do think, that's getting more noticeable, and that problem is very hard to hide, once it's out. So stuff like that's important. Me personally, the folks I end up, talking to or feel like I can relate more to is kind of more on the, sovereignty angle. I use the Canadian trucker example all the time. It's like, well, wealth preservation is good, but what about like your freedom? It's like we're seeing a lot more tyrannical behavior from, major, Western, governments. I personally think is, appalling. And I think, we need to, take it upon ourselves to make sure, we're resilient to government, overreach. And the Canadian trucker example is particularly eye-opening for me because, these were, citizens following the laws and peacefully protesting, and, their government still came down and, brought the hammer on them because they just disagreed with their political views, which is extremely concerning to me. And, Bitcoin gives us the opportunity to opt out of that craziness by just being in full control of our wealth and not having to, rely on third-party intermediaries or rails, people that don't share our moral worldviews, control. And when I'm, talking to, more, church type audience, it's just nobody's safe. And I think it's important to know that it's not necessarily comfortable. But just in 2023 here, these documents just came out with the new administration. The FBI was investigating, Catholic, traditional Latin mass Catholic parishes in the U.S. For under the guise of there could be white supremacists, going to these parishes. So at any one point, they could have been debanked. They didn't know they were being, investigated or by the FBI. They didn't do anything wrong. But here we are, a larger, police state and, pseudo military force, in their throes. And it's like, I just don't think what angle these are going to come from. Even, COVID is another great example of this, and like the Twitter files. I think that's some of the most important reporting of our time, and we just see all these different ways that government overreach is trying to limit our individual freedoms, and I think that's something that everybody needs to stand up to, and Bitcoin's one of the best tools to do so.
Yeah, I actually saw today a collage of images of people, I think on Reddit or Twitter, Facebook, I don't know, just from social media, people that were debanked for basically the craziest reasons. Like I even saw one that said like, I just have a company with a lot of transactions from all over the world. I don't know what this person did. I think it was a service business. And it just got a letter from the bank saying, yeah, we cannot service you anymore, which actually means like on the back end of our operation, we cannot really handle, all the reporting and whatnot. So yeah, it's just easier to kick you out of our customer base than to actually adjust our processes and stuff like that. And there were a lot of those examples that I think everyday people are running into, right? And to be honest, I actually think that is way more common than we think.
100%.
The fact that people are being debanked without having any clue why that is, they just assume they chose a bank and that works, and they're just doing their legitimate business. But just because the banks are so overburdened with all the KYC and all the regulation and whatnot. Which I think that's a whole nother conversation, right? But if there was free money, why do you need KYC? I love I heard Bruce Fenton, he's a good talker also on Bitcoin at a conference. He said, did you know that there was like crazy world trade, like empires have been built without KYC? I thought that was such a amazing thing to say, because it's so true, right? It's not that KYC because of illicit activities, etc., is so many. Like there's always illicit activity, even when the KYC is present, right? Like there are people that do that, and so I think this is all just part of the restrictiveness becoming bigger and bigger, and which eventually comes from trying to keep control over this system, as we alluded to before, right? But yeah, I think it's underappreciated or underreported how much debanking is going on with legitimate businesses and normal people that are just trying to live their life. And I do think this is also something that could help people eventually discover that there is another money that's actually not controlled, right, by a central entity or has this KYC element to it. Yeah, maybe that's. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to build on that point because I think it's a phenomenal one, where that's what, a lot of the reason why I'm so opposed to the ETF, and I really don't actually like the number go up, kind of like orange pilling technique, even though, I think it's, largely true, or, works with, a lot of people, because, it's like Bitcoin is money and that's great. I think it's best form of money, known to man. But what about all our other rights? It's like Bitcoin is a tool to, protect those. And I think you're spot on with like, people get debanked for the craziest things, right? And that can have, extremely detrimental, consequences to, running a business, running a household. And it's like, we don't want to, subject ourselves to that possibility. And so even I was looking to hire like, automation, consultant, and, it's just on like Fiverr, and, some folks in Pakistan or like Ukraine. I was like, well, I'm sure they do good work and they seem like good people, but is this going to come back and like bite me in the ass somehow? It's like, you have ties to like Pakistan. It's like, no, I don't. I just hired like a consultant, there for like, it was a one-time project. It was like, what are you trying to say? Like,
yeah, and it's also very interesting that people would assume that they could just do global business, right?
It is. And my men's group, we just read encyclical from Pope Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum. It was written in 1891, as on labor and capital, and it was just like inspiring, like the wisdom it carried 130 years later. But that's I think another huge force of good for Bitcoin is being able to maintain human dignity regardless of your home nation or whatever currency you're subjected to. It's like it's still the same output of labor and work that this person put a lot of good faith and intention behind. Like, why should they get punished for that because their central planners are less responsible or less powerful than somebody else's central planners? Like, it's really perverse to me.
Yeah, I agree. So I have some questions to wrap up. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, what is a misconception about Bitcoin or Bitcoiners you wish more people understood?
I've been actually surprised anecdotally. This is just via my clientele, how many women are leading families in Bitcoin adoption. I think a lot of times we go to conferences, and admittedly it is a lot of men generally that are interested in this. But I've been very surprised and impressed, like how many women just that I've come across that are leading the Bitcoin charge.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, I'm opening my audience in YouTube. It's probably like 90% men or something. Yeah, very cool that you're actually seeing that. What do you think is the cause of that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Like, they are very well read and researched, and listen to podcasts, and read the blog posts, and we run in very similar circles. I have to imagine it has something to do with kind of like this kind of innate like caretaker responsibility. And it's like, I think they very much see it as a long-term wealth generation tool. None of them are interested in trading. They understand the importance of holding Bitcoin, and specifically work with them in like financial planning context. So they want to understand how that plays, how Bitcoin affects their broader finances at large, especially into the future for themselves and their heirs.
Yeah, super interesting. Cool. Yeah, that's a great one to share. So when you look ahead, let's say the next decade, what excites you most about the next decade, and what do you think we should watch out for? Could be positive or negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I do consider myself, optimist. I think, we should all strive to be, optimists. And, there's always, current events that, are very, pessimistic. I think we need to fight that, kind of mainstream media, like, narrative, fear mongering they're trying to push. I'm very bullish on, decentralized media. I think, Bitcoin, plays a large part of that. But I would say, I kind of touched on this earlier. It's like, I'm very excited about, a new type of decision maker being kind of rotated into positions of power. And I think that comes from a more grassroots, libertarian, self-sovereignty kind of mindset and moral worldview.
Yeah. To come back to the male female, 93% male on the channel. So
okay, interesting.
Yeah, I never really looked at that, but yeah, awesome. You're seeing that. Yeah, I think in that sense, Bitcoin is actually, I think, also something that is a very logical thing that you should or could choose for your family, right? Like, once you understand it is less risky than you might perceive in the beginning, right? So the idea what you shared about just the long-term outlook that it can create for your family, I think that might be something that's appealing to women, like the less risky stuff, more substantial, fundamental choice for the longevity of your family. Yeah, cool. All right.
Totally. And I do want to shout out my friend Molly, who I know is a female listener of your show. So very cool.
What's up, Molly? Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's I love that. So more women should get into Bitcoin, I think, too. Yeah, let's wrap up with my last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go of?
Yeah, I think that has to, be my, Catholic faith. It's just given me, a ton of, I think, ability to make, better decisions, and, just kind of understanding, I'm a child of God, my rights, come from God. And, I think, it's important we pray and have a spiritual connection with the Lord, and, kind of use his, have a personal relationship with Jesus, and use that as a framework to, make decisions moving forward. I think it just grounds us in something, outside of ourselves, and allows us to be, much better people by believing in God and the greater humanity at whole.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, and I appreciate your time. And I'll see you in Amsterdam in a few weeks.
Yes, sir. I can't wait. Thanks so much, Bram. That was awesome.
Awesome, man. Appreciate you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.